over pipelines is heating up. More than 2,000 participants have indicated they want to be part of the NEB hearings into Kinder Morgan. The $5.4 billion expansion project is one of the company's biggest, and it could be operational by late 2017. Joining us tonight for more on this is Eoin Madden, climate campaigner with the Wilderness Committee. How are you, Eoin?
I'm very well, Jill. Thank you.
Good. The deadline for applying for intervener status in this case has just passed earlier in February.
Yeah, 12th of February. It meant a very busy time for folks like me and other organizations. We went out and we decided to give workshops to people. The process to actually get involved this time was very different to the Enbridge Northern Gateway process, much more difficult in my eyes and for a lot of the people that tried to get in there. And we're very proud and stoked that 2,100 people actually came together over this, despite the challenges of getting involved. It shows a great solidarity in opposition.
What was more difficult?
Well, unfortunately in 2012, following through on federal government policy, a bill was sunken deep within a federal budget bill called Bill C-38, and it introduced new qualifiers to regular folk like you and I who might want to actually participate in the process. So you had 1,200 people say no to Northern Gateway, and 3 people said, they thought it was a good idea, and the National Energy Board still said, we think this should go forward. I think the level of participation perhaps wasn't something that the federal government was all that impressed with. It uses the word fast tracking. It brought in these new qualifiers to say that I would have to prove I was either directly affected by the pipeline or I had expertise that the National Energy Board needed from me before I would be allowed to speak at all.
Right. Although that does make sense, because they really don't want to sit around for days and weeks and months listening to people who might not be impacted, might not have expertise, just sort of wax on about pipelines and obviously be against them.
Yeah, well, I mean, the attitude from the government this time around very much is, the climate concern need not apply. So folks like myself who are climate campaigners, that issue was specifically excluded from the list of issues they were prepared to deal with. Tar sand pipelines has a huge impact on everybody. There is a guaranteed spill into the atmosphere. We know now that our economy hangs on being responsible towards the climate and shifting to cleaner energies. So there are very few people who are not affected by this. I don't believe that you should fast-track processes like this. And in fact, the greater participation there is, the cleverer the environmental decisions are. When you start to exclude people and information, like the US EPA, which didn't get into this process and tried to, then you're really reducing the smartness around your environmental decision making.
Do you think the federal government, the NEB, feel ganged up on in these kind of situations, know that they're pretty much in a no-win situation, so they want to dim the number of voices that are speaking out against this kind of a project?
Well, I mean, there's enough people there that could come along and support it if they felt like it. The polls are clear. The majority of people in BC do not want tar sand pipelines. We know we have a better future here in Canada. I mean, if we can build the tar sands, we can build geothermal plants, we can follow the US president's lead and say climate change is real and we can't sell oil and gas unless we deal with climate change progressively. So I don't believe decision-making gets better the less people that are involved. The more of a discussion you have, the better it is. I don't think Northern Gateway actually provided a very sort of an onerous process for the government. It was a very good process compared to what's now being provided for Kinder Morgan and their proposal.
Mm-hmm. But how much difference is there between the Kinder Morgan proposal and the Enbridge proposal? Well,
the Kinder Morgan proposal is bigger. It's close to 1 million barrels per day of the same type of oil or bitumen, tar sands oil. There's a number of different terms that's used for it. It is the most climate affecting type of oil.
Why?
17% more climate changing gases comes from its creation and its usage for a start. It expands the tar sands, which is the reason why climate change is a real problem in Canada. We've set targets here in Canada and we're not going to meet them by 2020 because of the tar sands, and that's accepted now. So even right up to the advisors of the Prime Minister's office, we're hearing this new message, and it's saying, please take climate change seriously, come out with regulations on climate so that we can actually be a climate leader and not the world's climate laggard, which we've become.
And one of your major concerns obviously is climate change, but let's talk a little bit about the First Nations groups really banding together.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and obviously I'm not tasked to speak on behalf of any nation. It was amazing to see a group of nations join together, both from south of the border in the United States and north of the border here at the Burrard Inlet, as Coast Salish peoples in a joint application. that's a symbol of the climate concern people have. I mean, folks south of the border, the Lummi Nation for one, was involved in the coal conversation there and were brought in, which is wonderful. To see them get involved in this and identify the Salish Sea as a place where they want to turn the tide on climate change is wonderful. Beyond that, I can't really speak. I know that there's also an issue with feeling like the Kinder Morgan hearings don't represent constitutional consultation. And they're the two messages we get from their news releases.
Right. Well, and as you mentioned, you know, the National Energy Board ruled in favor of Northern Gateway.
Yeah.
With 207 requirements, I think they have to meet. 209. The company has to meet. But I think it's shocking for a lot of people that so many voices can speak up and say this. We do not want this, and yet the National Energy Board, which is the gas and you know, energy overseer of this country, says, well, thanks for that, but we're going to go ahead and say okay anyways. Do you get the sense the same thing will happen with Kinder Morgan?
I fear that from a federal government perspective, we've bet the farm on oil and gas, which is good until you get to the point where climate change is a reality and you're trying to sell the world's most destructive type of oil, the most climate changing type of oil. It's a bad business deal. So I think that there is a fear of large scale participation, and people are participating because of their realization our economy is at stake here.
All right, we're out of time. Eoin Madden, thanks for joining us.
Lovely to be here.